Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. Today, Jennifer and I will be having an affair with N.K. Jemisin again and her short story, Red Dirt Witch. This is a second story that we've read from her collection, How Long Till Black Future Month. So we are well acquainted with N.K. Jemisin now. I've read, I think, 4 of her novels. Oh, there they are, right behind my head. So we're very excited to continue reading from her collection. I'm sure we'll explore more because there's more stories in this collection, and I'm sure they're all fantastic. So before we begin, we don't have to give any intro because we all know who N.K. Jemisin is now.
Do we, Joey? Do we all know?
Yeah, she's a literal genius. She won the MacArthur Grant, which we love to read from people that have that. It's not intimidating at all.
She's won a ton of awards. Was born in 1972, so she's a contemporary modern author. And as you said, we have loved everything that we have touched of hers. So I'm really excited to talk about the story today.
Yeah, maybe her best award or accolade is the one of the series right behind me here, the Broken Earth trilogy. She won the Hugo Award for every single book in the trilogy, which has never happened before. So kudos to her.
So like a triple play. It wasn't just one book that was accoladed. It was all 3 of them.
Give us an intro to this story. In N.K. Jemisin's Southern Gothic tale, Root Worker, Emmeline guards her Alabama family against the White Lady, and this is a capital W and a capital L. A mythical embodiment of white supremacy offering prosperity in exchange for black children. Their supernatural struggle mirrors America's racial calculus. How much must be surrendered to buy progress? Emmeline's folk magic, woven from indigenous and African traditions, battles the White Lady's hollow promises, symbolized by her white skin and parasol-bearing shadow child. Daughter Pauline volunteers as sacrifice to secure their future, visions of marches, desegregation, and a black president. Emmeline fights to take her place, a generational clash between preservation and transformation. Jemisin lays bare the brutal arithmetic of civil rights. Every gain rests on ancestral sacrifice. The red dirt itself becomes resistant, as Emmeline's final act plants seeds of liberation in soil stained with blood and memory. A haunting allegory where folklore exposes America's original sin and the fierce love that defies it. Okay, that was generally pretty good for some reason. Sometimes they're not.
I would have to say, Joey, that was a really great summary.
Yeah, sometimes you're like, this didn't give us a flavor of what this was, but this one was pretty good. So where's your initial impressions on this story?
Joey, I really enjoyed this because it is a bit of magical realism. It's a historical fiction. N.K. Jemisin always does such a great job. She's not overwrought. This fantasy piece seamlessly integrated into the story from the moment we started. And I'm sure that we'll read that intro just because I was like, very interesting talking about the nature of dreams and when dreams turn into prophecies. She had me from the first sentence. So I found it very easy to integrate into this magical world. And over the last few episodes, we have talked a lot about magical realism from various places around the world. And so I was very happy to see this American woman writing about the experiences of African Americans in America since the 50s until the current day. And I just think she did an amazing job of incorporating everything into this very short story. How about you? What did you like about the story?
I loved everything about this story. I think from start to finish, it's a great story. The best part about this story for me was if you were to remove the magical and speculative elements from the story, it would still work. It still stands up. It would be a great story no matter what. At its core, of course, one of the major themes is racism and how Emmeline is, as a black woman, trying to navigate a majority white society. The people that are in power are white. Another major theme is this woman and a mother who is protecting and sacrificing for her family. We love stories like that, apparently, because Ken Liu, same thing. We had the Paper Menagerie. That one was a great story and a similar theme there where there was some sacrifice. But we also have the sacrifice that Emmeline makes to her community, to the black community, to say that she will sacrifice herself, her life, and her freedom so that her children's generation and future generations can have civil rights and equality. I think that's like such an important aspect, obviously, of the story. You could not read it and not walk away with that information because then you're not reading the story. I wouldn't say it's magic realism because I think there is supposed to be more of an explanation. I guess it's sort of on the cusp. To me, this feels like low fantasy where there's sort of a magic system because we can see that she's using herbs and she's using natural elements. Whereas Gabriel Garcia Marquez is more like, no one cares that this guy has angel wings or bat wings or that this woman has a body of a tarantula or whatever. So I see it as a little bit different, but it's perfectly reasonable to say that this could be magical realism.
It's really magical. Can we say that?
Yeah, it is magical and definitely is. I mean, there's magic is supposed to be a big part of this story, but I think it should be required reading for maybe not children because there's a little sexy time in the beginning. It's not explicit, but maybe slightly older children because I think there's so much nuance to this story and is something that, from my education at least, talking about racism, it wasn't really brought up. What kids are learning now, I don't know, but at least when I was in school, these were not topics that were coming up. So I think this would be a great way to explain to kids, maybe if you take the sexy time part out, how racism affects people on a very personal level. We don't talk about racism all the time because that's not always in stories, but we talk about empathy and how stories allow you to gain empathy for people that don't look like you and don't have the same lived experience. And I think this is exactly the right story for that.
Yeah, Joey, I appreciate that you said that because I listened to the audiobook and I also read it from her collection because I just love the title of her collection. It's just very engaging. She did a great job of sprinkling in facts in United States history, undisputed facts, these things happened throughout the story. If you were reading this from another culture, or if you're a young person and don't have the historical context, if you don't know about when Brown versus the Board of Education and all of these segregation things were happening in the 50s and 60s, you might miss some of those references. Why are there fire hoses? Why are there dogs? There's not a timestamp in this story necessarily. It doesn't say, hi, we're here in 1947 and I'm going to tell you a story. Those markers aren't there. But the fact that she sees into the future through this prophecy that she's having in this interaction with this magical, malevolent force, the White Witch, not the White Witch, the White Lady, also a witch, but yes, the White Lady, that we are getting projected from her viewpoint. She said, I'm just tired. I don't have hope. The world has been the world it has always been. Nothing has ever changed. I am just tired. And one of her lines was like, I could do something right now, but let's just be honest. I'm tired. I don't want to do this. And then this supernatural force comes in through her dream, and then it's the manifestation. So back to the teaching element, I went today and looked up various historical time points that were referenced in the story. So I think it's a great thing to incite curiosity and to get a little better schooled on the sequence of events. So thank you for calling that out. Yes, could we make this required reading for every high school student? I think the sexy time was so
Yeah, then it's okay.
subliminally done. It was not in any way graphic. It was actually very sweet and tender. And I think one of the things that I appreciate about this author is that primarily we are dealing with female characters in this story, but not exclusively. So the mother and the daughter have a very clear bond. It is clear in the story that the mother and the daughter both have these supernatural gifts of sensing things that others are missing. But she also has two sons, and she mentions one son is an artist and the other one was left ambiguous. Maybe he senses things, maybe he doesn't. And the character of her boyfriend, I loved. I thought that was just a really legitimate and honest thing of, yeah, we just had our fun, but if you want to live, you got to go to work because money doesn't fall from trees, babe. I'll see you on Sunday. And I just loved the honesty and the intimacy of those characters that did not feel forced or contrived. Things didn't just get put in to move the plot along. The plot unfolded in a very organic way. How about you, Joey?
Yeah, I do like that aspect of the beginning of when she has her little sexy time with her boyfriend, who I can't, is his name Frank?
His name is Frank. It
Yeah.
certainly is Frank.
Name. Okay, I agree. That's a great name. I actually really enjoyed that part, not because it was obviously not erotic at all. There was no details, and that's what I was getting at. But I really enjoyed that N.K. Jemisin put that in the story because it really shows that Emmeline, or M, has a pretty well-balanced life. She understands that she needs to take time for herself and to fulfill her own desires in whatever way. In this case, it was an erotic pleasure, which, go ahead. You're an adult woman. You can do what you want. It was consensual. But I really appreciate that because I think so often in stories when a character is a mother, it's sort of like their defining feature. And in this case, Emmeline is a woman first or a person first, but she is also a mother. She has a variety of titles, and I just appreciate that. I thought that was a very realistic way of representing this woman.
Joy, I appreciate you said that too, because another defining feature of who she is also a healer. She is a person in the community that she has a little sign out front that her son put up when it was time to do business. I think it said herbs and potions and all and sundry, which I also loved is just like a very funny phrase. It's like, all comers, whatever ails you, come see me. I will help you out. And I thought that was just really incredibly well done. One of the things that came up for the story that also was just a reminder, we talk about this quite often because it comes up in the literature that we're reading, women's right to control their own agency, to control their own reproduction. And in this story, which I'm assuming was set before 1951, when the first legislation's challenges to segregation in schools was happening. So I'm assuming that was in the 40s when this story was set. A woman comes to her and says, I have an unplanned pregnancy. I've had 2 children and I can't afford to have a third. Can you help me? And in this woman's words, she said, I know this is a sin. Emmeline says, it's not a sin against you because you didn't create the society that made you choose between letting 3 kids starve or 2 kids live. There was nothing ambiguous about that message, right? It was very, very straightforward. And it actually turned out, which I also was like, very interesting story crafting here. It turns out that she received a guinea hen, a fowl, a piece of meat as her reward for providing the service for the woman. And she creates a recipe and she cooks the recipe. And at the very end of the story, she's like, I'm trying to pull out all of these images from my dreams that will allow me to defeat the white lady. And she's like, the only thing I didn't have was rosemary. Wait, I cooked that chicken with some rosemary. Bam, down you go, white lady. And I loved, Joey, and I'll just drop this point for a moment, that they'd used the capitalization of WL for white lady. And then they also spoke to women who have white skin as little w and little l. So there was that distinction of how are you using these names. I just really appreciated that. And that comes out in another story that you and I will be discussing next week, which I'll save all of the commentary on that for later.
I just want to read that quote that you were first referencing. She said, "Sin's making a world where women got to choose between 2 children eaten and 3 children starving." Emmeline said, and you sure as hell didn't do that. Love how there's no beating around the bush there. This is not a morality issue. This is a societal and systemic issue. And I think N.K. Jemisin does a really great job of separating those two things with morality and systemic racism. Because in that story, her name's Nadine, the one that is coming to her to terminate her pregnancy, because she had a male suitor, as the Southerners might say, who is a white man and who has access and power and financial stability to be able to afford to take care of an additional child. But it's the stigma that goes along with having a biracial child at this point in time. Not that they obviously did not exist. They did. They certainly did. That was not the problem. The problem was the optics of that. And we don't know who this guy was. He could have been a prominent person in their town, and they come from a pretty small town. I don't assume that he came from the same exact town, because it seemed like this was a very segregated area, as was the rest of America at this point. And I really love the way that nature is used in this story, because we do know that she does have Native American ancestry, Emmeline does. And so there is this tie to the natural world that is prevalent throughout the story. And I think it really comes into play, especially when we first meet the white lady. I have the quote here. So when we meet the white lady, this is what Jemisin writes. She smelled the lady before she saw her, a thick wall of magnolia perfume, too cloying to be quite natural. Outside, the perfume wasn't as bad, diminished and blended in among the scent of M's garden and the faint sulphurous miasma that was omnipresent in Pratt City on still days like this. That from the village creek, polluted as if with nearly a century's worth of iron and steel manufacturing waste. So we got a lot of information in that. We even understand geographically where this town is located. Obviously, it's in an undesirable area, air pollution coming from nearby iron and steel manufacturing. But I really appreciated the way that she sets this white lady, the capital W, capital L lady apart because she is othered in this story, and not in like a bad way where, and I'll use the Ken Liu story again because I just referenced it, where the little boy is othered for having Chinese heritage. But in this case, this white lady is unnatural to the surroundings. She does not belong here. She has artificial scent of the magnolia tree that is, it's clear. She's making it abundantly clear. She's attempting to mask herself. She is literally wearing the costume of sorts. She's vampiric, according to the synopsis. She is described as being fae, so a fairy of some sort, of malevolent sort, not like Tinkerbell.
She was not a good one. She was not a good one, Joey.
I really liked that she uses natural elements to allow the reader to identify who is good and who is evil in this story.
And Joey, I love the playfulness of the description. So M's son comes in and is like, Mom, somebody wants you outside. It's like, really? It's like, who is it? And it's a red lady. And she berates him and said, you don't have any room to talk. You're part Native American Indian. And he's like, not red like that, Mom. And he like rolled his eyes and he was very dismissive of his mom. It's like, you'll see. So mom walks out and she sees this otherworldly presence who just looks a little off. She says she's wearing antiquated clothing. She has this incredibly, incredibly white skin, and she has a heap of very burgundy, dark red hair. And she's like, oh, my son was not being a racist little name caller. He was not doing that. He was literally giving a description of what he saw. And I just thought that was a very good choice on the part of the author to call out what could have been seen as a racist statement as honestly a statement of fact. And I thought that was really important because she's dealing with this huge umbrella of racial tensions in America in this time and place, and yet she's not calling it out in that moment. And I thought that was really great. And Joy, I just want to circle back to one thing that you said about Nadine, who was making this unplanned pregnancy choice. The way that Emmeline handles it and gives the quote that you read to us, it's very practical. There's so much practicality about Emmeline. She is not moralizing. And as you said, N.K. Jemisin in her books does not seem to give us a moral stance. She's like, here are some facts. You decide what is appropriate for you to believe about the way these things are happening. I appreciate you calling that out. It's a very practical person who has no illusions that the world owes her anything. Emmeline is like, the world is hard, and I am just doing the best I can to keep myself and my kids safe, and I'm tired of it. I'm just ready to stop doing this.
Yeah, and I think that sort of mentality carries over into Emmeline because at the end, of course, she sacrifices herself. She switches out with Pauline because she doesn't feel that she is sufficient enough to be able to go forth and fight for equality and civil rights. I mean, she's a fictional character, so I can't ask her, but I didn't see it that way. I think Emmeline could have done it. She had these prophecy dreams, which real quick, this has almost nothing to do with what I'm about to say, but there's a lot of mention of things in threes. You have 3 dreams. That's when you know it's a prophecy. She has 3 children. And there's one other one that I wrote down because I was like, oh, that's important.
The spells, you have to have 3 ingredients to start the spell, right? It was rosemary, sage,
yes.
and fig. Was that your third 3 things?
No, there was another one, but now I can't remember what it was. But anyway, there you go. 3. We got 3 of 3s. Okay?
We got 3 threes.
Now I'm just going to pivot because I can't remember what I was going to say anyway. There is this blending of Christianity because, of course, we have the Trinity and the things in threes are prevalent in Christianity. And then we have the mix of folk medicine and folk tales. I really enjoyed how she blended those 2 things because it felt very natural. It felt like this is something that people would naturally do when they are raised with 2 different types of religion or spirituality. They would, of course, take what they want from either of those things and blend them into this new spiritual experience for themselves. And then we have the sycamore fig tree. Jemisin notes in there that it's a rarity, this is the last one in the United States. And then we learn how it was brought over. Let me just read that because I really
that's a beautiful passage, Joy. Thank you for reading that for us because I think that's super important.
So it's part of the reason why the white lady cannot enter her property because of the rosemary, sage, and this fig tree. Jemison writes, eyes widening, the woman finally turned about, spying at last the prize of Emmeline's yard, the sycamore fig. It grew in an arc over the far side of the yard because many years ago some neighborhood children had played on it and nearly broken its trunk. It had survived, though, through the heat, through the breaking, and through isolation, for it was nearly the only one of its kind in America. By the stories Emmeline's own mother had told of its planting, the seed fig had been smuggled over from Africa herself, tucked into some poor soul's wound to keep it safe and living through the Middle Passage. Fig trees, there's biblical ties to that as well. There's a story about it. Can't remember. I think it's in Luke. I don't know. Ask a Bible scholar. But I really loved how that is also called out as not a native thing. Sycamore figs are natural to Africa and the Middle East. But this one came from Africa, as we were told. So this had to come over with the enslaved people that were obviously captured and brought over forcibly as a piece of keeping their culture alive. And then we can see at the end of the story that I really appreciated is when Pauline is older and she starts her own company. What is she selling?
I think
Green?
she's selling like collard greens.
Yes, okay, that's it. I know it's a food. She's selling collard greens and she creates her own business. She puts a little bit of that fig jam into each of them, not only to sweeten the flavor, but to also allow people to consume a piece of their culture. And I just thought this is such a beautiful symbol in this story.
And Joey, she said she put the fig in there also to cut the bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a sweetener, but it was also the bitterness of the history that got us to this point. When you were talking about the smuggling of the fig seed that started this, the only one that's surviving in America, the forethought of the people who have been enslaved and forcibly removed from their home to say, we are bringing this symbol with us. We are bringing this magic with us. And I thought that was just really an important part of the story, that there was many references, even speaking to the capital W, capital L, white lady, about where she came from in the old country. Her tricks and the way that the world works is not the same here. And the red dirt witch, I think, was the immediate call out. It's like, I am in a new time and place. And as such, my magical powers and the resources that I have of herbs that are growing locally are the definitive thing that's protecting that community. I just loved everything about that. And neither one of us are Bible scholars. We do not have a
Yeah.
wealth of biblical references. So apologies to those who may say that we're getting it completely wrong. We'll acknowledge that. Maybe
I'm
we are
pretty
getting
sure
that
that's
completely
in
wrong.
Luke.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to give that to Joey. I have no evidence to the contrary or another theory. What I loved when you were talking earlier about these blending of cultures, it felt very organic and it felt very peaceable. Her Christian values and her African roots and her Native American wisdom of being close to the land, all of those just were. Nobody was in conflict. They all melded together. It was great. That was a very inspirational, subtle message that we don't have to make these hard distinctions unless we choose to. That many of these things are complementary and there is space for all of these beliefs in one person and one community.
As you were talking, I think I understand a little bit more about Emmeline as a character and her motivations at the end. As I said in the beginning here, I feel like she could have learned to update with the times. But as you're talking, I realized that, well, she is a person of her own era. And so she had to rely on these natural medicines and remedies and natural magic using nature to solve her problems and help other people. But that was no longer possible. It's not needed anymore. Now it's political maneuvering and protesting and taking to the streets and engaging with the white people in society to try and overturn some of what is going on. We can see that immediately with Pauline because she, of course, has that interaction with Emmeline with the orange. There's an orange that drops off the white guy's truck and she goes to return it and knows, like, no, this guy's not going to want it back because I've touched it. So now this is a sullied fruit, basically. And Emmeline is like, you were supposed to do that. You're lucky he didn't think you were pretty. Obviously, then there could have been a sexual assault. But Pauline sees this very differently. She sees this as there has to be a confrontation. It's not really a conversation because he's probably like, just you could have it, just get away from me. But she sees that there is a different method to find equality or to gain access to resources. So now that's my perspective on it, is that Emmeline's like, I don't know those ways. I don't know how to learn that way. I only know what I've been doing.
Yeah, Joey, I appreciate that you took us to that scene where the daughter's like, hey, I got this orange. And the mom's like, white people in the story, that was kind of her generalization, do not make a distinction of whether you found something or you stole something. If you have it and I didn't give it to you, grant this to you, it's a violation. The daughter, Pauline, was savvy enough to say, oh, these people are so bigoted that if I, as an African American person, touch the orange, he's going to be like, no, you keep it. Like, I can't have it back. And I just, that was very interesting because Pauline calls out the white lady, the mythical creature, whatever we're going to call her, the WL. She said, you stole that girl's power. She has a young lady who is enthralled to her and somehow enslaved in some ways. She was there under conditions that she did not control, and she was never going to escape. And through this vampire slash non-vampire evil entity, whatever she is, she's up to no good. Pauline calls out to WL and says, hey, you stole that girl. And she's like, oh, I'm so wounded. How dare you talk to me that way? And of course, the white lady is making a big scene out of it. But Pauline is right. You stole this person's power. And so the fact that Pauline's like, I didn't steal anything. I'm not the thief here. You look around society. Who do you think really did the thieving? It wasn't me picking up an orange off the ground because I'm hungry. That wasn't me. So I just really appreciated that parallel. Again, we talk about this beautiful storytelling and these little details that get woven in that you just never know until you really sit with it. What else was she trying to tell me by these symbols?
Yeah, I think the white lady here is obviously representing the old South, the antebellum South. And because the little girl is black, that she has stolen and is keeping as, I guess, her servant. We don't know what else she's doing. We just know that she stole her power and now she's carrying her parasol to keep her out of the sun. Yeah, I think that Pauline has this sense of justice and she understands how she will have to navigate in the future, especially because we know that she also has dreams of prophecy and she can see what's coming down the line here of there's going to be desegregation of public schools. There's going to be a black president. So they're alluding to Obama here. And
The
Michelle
Supreme
Obama.
Court,
Yeah, and Supreme Court with I can't
Clarence
remember
Thomas.
yes. Why can't I remember his name? I don't know.
Lots of reasons, Joey. Lots of
Yeah,
reasons.
yeah, he's an asshole. That's why.
Not a great guy.
We can clearly see that that is the point of this. She also is like the everyman character when a character goes unnamed. Obviously, you know this. I'm just going to explain it to listeners. So she's sort of representing all white women in particular, but really white people at large, where they want to come and claim ownership over other human beings, in particular black people. There's obviously tension because slavery is now over. We're still in Jim Crow and we're on the cusp of the civil rights movement. So there's a lot of racial tension, especially because they can see into the future. They know it's going to happen. One of the most, I think, powerful parts of this story is talking about the fairgrounds. Let me just read that quote because I think that's a good quote. I mean, they're all good quotes.
Again, as we say, it's like, well, we only highlighted half the story. Only half of these
Yeah.
sentences are highlighted to talk about.
Let me give you context before I start, because obviously, if you haven't read this. Okay, so Pauline runs away in the middle of the night, and Emmeline goes there on a mule, which I think is so funny, because I've ridden horses and never rid a mule, but I bet it's not a comfortable ride. And she says that her butt was raw from it. Anyway, so this is where Emmeline goes to find Pauline. So the fairgrounds were only fairgrounds once a year. The rest of the time, it was just a fallow field, occasionally used for harness racing. Long ago, though, it had been the breaking ground of a plantation, the place where new slaves freshly forced marched up from port of Mobile, right? It's not Mobile, it's Mobile.
It's
I've never been,
Mobile.
okay, I've never been to Alabama.
Mobile, Alabama. It's a place.
Yeah,
It's a place.
Mobile. It got branded and stripped of name and spirit before being sent into the fields. As Emmeline halted the mule and slid off its back, she felt all that old blood there in the ground, mixed with old tears and the red dirt beneath her feet. White folk, again, this is capitalized, capital W, capital F, fed on that sort of magic, this would be the place of power for them. So we know that she's referring to the Fae, if you want to call them vampires, doesn't matter, white folk or white people, the mythical versions of them. This is their place of power. This is where they have done the most damage to the Black community. It's literally seeped into the soil. We can see the juxtaposition of where Emmeline is within her power, is within her own home and her own property, because she has cultivated this garden with specific herbs and all of these things to help protect herself and her family. I don't remember where I was going with that.
You were taking us to that beautiful scene at the fairgrounds. You just wanted to give us some context of how we got there.
I lost the plot on my own stuff here, but I don't remember. I know it's going to be pretty relevant to the next story we're going to be talking about.
It is so relevant, Joey. I was so excited. It's like, ring shout. I see a lot of echoes through these plot lines. One is a very short story, which is maybe 10 pages, and the other is there's a full-blown novella. I'm super excited to talk to you about that later, but I do appreciate the mother's intuition. She knew when she woke up in the middle of the night and saw her daughter was missing. She was like, I knew where she went, and I know why. And so the mom catches the daughter already in conversation with the WL. They were already in negotiations to find the remedy, and the WL says, I will trade your life for prosperity for everyone else. The mom's like, no. Wait a minute, Mom. I want to hear the rest of the deal before you say no. She's like, how much prosperity? What is going to be traded? And there's that mythical, magical element where they started the binding process. Now this is a contract, and the mom scoots in the middle because the daughter, again, I love that she's like a little lawyer in her brain. She was like, pardon me, miss, you did say it was one life for three, and now you're trying to take my mom too. So it's 2 for 2. So don't be a big stealer. Stick with your contract, and one person's going to go and 3 people are going to be spared. And again, those themes, as in the paper menagerie we referenced in this episode from Mother's Day, the mother's love is take me. My kids deserve a full and vibrant life of what's ahead of them. You need to take me. But the only thing that Pauline did steal, and she did steal this happened, but it was for a good thing. Did she either touch the white lady or something happened where she got an extra strength vision further along the timeline in the future? And she's like, Mom, you have no idea what I just saw. This is so much bigger and broader than the prophecy that you had. The white lady jumped back a little bit like, wait, you're stealing my stuff. You're stealing my vision. I didn't authorize that vision. You got to wait for me to give that to you. And I just really loved that she's like, Mom, it's so much better than you can even imagine. And your version was watered down compared to the version that I, the young, new, next generation, believes in and can see. And I think that was very relevant in the story when we go to the end where the mother is gone, Emmeline is gone, her sister takes in the kid because, as she said, blood is blood. We create our own community. She sends the kids off to college. They do all of these very interesting historical markers that we've talked about, like the bus rides and the rioting and all of the things that needed to happen. And the mom said, I was wrong. I now see hope. And because I have hope for the future, I will sacrifice my life because my kids, they're really going to do this. I just thought it was just a beautiful message and just sad. Sad this had to happen based on historical precedent. Obviously, it's a fantasy story, but a few too many truth bombs were in that story to have it just be like, oh, what a beautiful story of a mother's love. I'm like, yes, and all of the societal ills that made that choice necessary.
Yeah, that's why I think that this story would work completely without the magical or speculative elements, because we could still have, well, we had to take out the prophecy, but we could still have a mother who has an interaction with a nameless white woman who lays claim to one of her children and is especially feels justified because she was insulted in the process, and then the rest is right. So I mean, how genius is that you can take out a huge part of the story and it still works, it still holds up as a good story, and that's impressive. N.K. Jemisin.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Joey. We often talk about on what layer do you want to read the story, and you're like, oh, you can just rip that whole top layer off. totally holds, completely believable, still a vibrant story. This is not a complicated story. There's not a lot of complicated language. You're not going to need to get your thesaurus out or your dictionary to look up any of these words, but you are going to feel viscerally. She talks about the food they cook, the feeling of the dirt under their feet, what they are seeing, what they are smelling. All of these sensory experiences to me felt completely real. My mother's family came from near Mobile, Alabama, Joey. So Red
Really?
Bay, Bay, Alabama down there. My cultural legacy from my mom is very different than how I was raised as a child in Michigan. So it was just interesting. Some of the phrases the woman used are very much Southern phrases that my mom would use. And they're not highfalutin phrases, they're very of the people phrases.
I was going to talk about the ending because then we find out what happens to Emmeline's children. And I think we can see Pauline fill the shoes of her mother at the very end because Emmeline was a red dirt witch, as the title suggests. And so she was somebody that people came to in the community to help solve their problems. Somebody got into a fight with one of their family members and they got a wet cough. So she's like, here's 10 heads of garlic. Cook this with your food and give it to them and it'll be fine. And the same thing with Nadine, that she gave her a type of tea to terminate her pregnancy. Now Pauline has changed with the times and has understood that that is not how they're going to gain equality and equity in the United States. And so she goes to politics and she becomes the mayor. And she is now in a similar position where people are coming to her to have to solve their problems or to assist in their problems. So you can see how the generation have evolved in 2 generations in this small community. So I really liked how that felt like a very satisfying ending to this.
Yeah, very well said, Joey. And that is better than I could have expressed that. The elevation of her skills to meet the current society. Her mother had her beliefs and her skills in the natural world, and now it is time to take political action instead of the community action at home in the medicinal sense. So, yeah, just super inspiring because we also end the story where there is a great grandchild from Emmeline. This is getting passed on. This is moving forward. What amazing things might be possible for this little baby. Her great grandmother never had an opportunity to meet her, but her spirit is still surviving and being honored by that family. It's like, let me tell you a story about your great grandmother. And I just thought that was incredibly poignant. We talk a lot about storytelling, right? We are storytelling creatures. So anytime that they can really make a point of your legacy of kindness, sacrifice, wisdom, that doesn't depart when you're gone. It's carried on by the people who knew you. And I think that's very comforting.
And I do like in the end we understand that Pauline doesn't see that she has to sacrifice quite as much as maybe her mother Emmeline would have had to, because she still understands how to navigate in this changing world in the United States, and she understands that she doesn't have to give up or sacrifice culture and tradition for her to have those things. She can have both at the same time. She can have 2 different important aspects or characteristics about herself, and they can live within her at the same time. She can be of the updated and evolved time, and she can maintain these old world folk traditions that were passed down from her mother and keep her mother's memory alive in that way.
It felt like she could be her authentic self. All
Mhm.
parts of her were welcome and embraced in who she was. I wanted to just end by saying, when you were talking about the mother in the beginning of the story, when the children are still small, she was chastising her sons. It's like, there are certain rules for Black boys in this time period of what you can and cannot do. And I need to teach you, I need to pass on this wisdom of the cultural expectations for you so you don't get murdered, that you don't get harmed. And when you were talking about the mom's natural skills with her herbs and her plants and that natural magic, she also had this blueprint for how the world was supposed to work. And she wasn't about to change it. She needed to throw some truth in the face of her children to say, as a young lady, these are the things you do. As a young man, these are the things you can do and cannot do, that another woman in a different circumstances and a different racial category may not have to say the same things to her children. Again, one of the things that you and I often talk about, how do things get passed down and who is the person who's going to interrupt the transfer of this knowledge to evolve it into a more equal and compassionate point of view. And I really appreciated that N.K. Jemisin does that in a very subtle shift. She's like, that was before, and my mom understood her limitations. She couldn't break out of a mindset until the very last minute of her life in this plane. She's like, I can't see the hope for the future because I am too stuck in knowing the realities of the past. And I think when you pointed out that her daughter was able to have the hope and to move forward, that's exactly what we needed to do. We need to acknowledge the history of the past and say that was then, but we have an open playing field to decide what we want in the future. And that just felt super hopeful. Thank you for bringing this amazing author into my life and her beautiful collection. There's a whole host of stories in there over the next couple months, years, however long we're going to be talking about her stories. There's definitely a lot of future episodes on this beautiful author.
And you mentioned next week we'll be reading Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark, which is one of his novellas. It's very exciting. I love him. He's one of my favorite authors of all time. And I recommend this book to many different types of readers. And everybody's like, oh, I don't know. That doesn't sound like me. It's horror and it's like fantasy. And like, I don't think I'm gonna like it. And then they finish it and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I love it. It's like, I know. It's perfect. I love it so much.
Yeah, Joey, I have to agree with you. Normally not my thing. That's coming out of the gate. I was like, are we really talking about this topic? Is this really where you're starting with us with this novel? Okay, take a deep breath. Away we go. And it was so incredibly good. Very excited to talk about Ring Shout, which we both have read at this point. And in fact, I might just read it again before our conversation because it was just that good.
Beautiful. Another Peter Jelly Clark fan.
We're recruiting one at a time. I think we're going to get a lot more, but I'm definitely on that team.
Beautiful.